Now, let's discuss the imposter syndrome. High achievers often feel like a fraud despite evidence of their competence. They might attribute their success to luck rather than skills. It's important to recognize and challenge these feelings. Here is an interesting one: the misinformation effect. Our memories can be altered by the information we receive after an event, and this is why eyewitness testimony can be unreliable. Our brain often fill in the gaps with what we think should have happened. Now let's explore the cocktail party effect. We can focus on the single conversation in a noisy room. Our brain filter out irrelevant background noise, but we will still hear our name if it's mentioned elsewhere in the room. Well, have you experienced the spacing effect? We learn better when we speed out our studying over time. Cramming the night before test is less effective than regular space out study sessions. Our brain need time to process and consolidate information. Now let's talk about the mere ownership effect. We tend to value things more highly simply because we own them. That's why it's hard to sell things for what they are worth. We often think our possessions are more valuable than they are. Here is a common one: the fundamental attribution error. We tend to attribute others or others' behavior to their personality, ignoring situations factors. If someone cut off in traffic, we might think they are jerk. We rarely consider that they might be rushing to an emergency. Now let's discuss the illusion of control. We often overestimate our ability to control events. This is why some people think they can influence the outcome of the coin test. But it's important to recognize what we can and can't control. Well, have you ever heard of the sunk cost fallacy? We continue investigating or investing in something because of past investment, ignoring future costs. Like finishing a bad book because we have already read it half. Sometimes it's better to cut our losses and move on. Here is an interesting one: the confirmation bias. We tend to search for information that confirm our existing beliefs. We also tend to interpret ambiguous evidence as supporting our positions. It's important to actively seek out opposing viewpoints as well. Let's talk about the clustering illusion. We tend to see patterns in random events where none actually exist. This is why we might think a coin is due for heads after a string of fall. Well, it's important to remember that random events can cluster by chances. Well, have you ever experienced the anchoring effect? We rely too heavily on the first piece of information offered when making decisions. This is why the starting price in a negotiation is so important. Well, it set the standards for the rest of your decisions. Now, let's discuss the illusory truth effect. We tend to believe false information to be correct after repetitive exposure. Here is a common one: the overconfidence effect. We tend to overestimate our ability and the accuracy of our beliefs. This can lead to poor decision making and the unnecessary risk. Well, it's important to honestly assess our limitations. Now let's explore the Dunbar numbers. This suggests We can only maintain about 150 stable social relationships. Beyond this, we struggle to keep track of people and how we relate to them. This might explain why social media friends often don't feel like real friendship. Here is an interesting one: the peak end rule. We judge experiences largely based on how they were at their peak and how they ended. This is why a vacation with a great last day might seem better overall, even if there were some bumps along the way. Let's discuss the reactance theory. When our freedom are threatened, we tend to react by wanting them more. This is why telling someone not to do something might make them want to do more. Well, have you ever experienced the curse of knowledge? Once we know something, it's hard to imagine not knowing it. This can make it difficult for experts to explain things to beginners. It's important to remember what it was like to be a novice. Now, let's explore the pratfall effect. We tend to find people more likable after they have made a mistake. It makes them seems more human and relatable. This is why vulnerability can sometimes increase our charisma.